Doctor, it would be necessary for you to take an oath. Would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
I'll take the Bible.
Sorry?
I'll take the Bible.
Bible. Would you take the Bible that's there in your hand, please, and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this royal commission
that the evidence I shall give in this royal commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
As Your Honour pleases. Dr. Applewhite, I'll start with a little bit of background. You, from the United States...
I think we need the name, I think.
I beg your pardon. Your full name's Dr. Applewhite?
Monica Lisa Applewhite.
And you furnished a report to the Royal Commission, is that right, dated 22 July 2015?
That's correct.
And two annexes to that report. The one is your letter of instructions from Milton Bray, and the other is a curriculum vitae for yourself, is that right?
That's correct.
Do you confirm that the report is true and correct?
Yes.
I attend to the report, Your Honour.
It will become Exhibit 2913.
You are from the United States of America, is that right, Dr. Applewhite?
That's correct.
And you've been engaged by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Australia as an expert witness for the purpose of this hearing, is that right?
That's correct.
And your ordinary work is as a consultant broadly in the area of child sex abuse, is that right?
I've worked in other fields beyond sexual abuse. I also worked with physical abuse and neglect. But the majority of my work has been with sexual abuse in organizations.
And not limited to children?
No, also vulnerable adults as well.
Just by way of background, your primary and secondary education, in other words, your school education, at what nature of institutions were you at school?
Sorry, did you say my primary and secondary?
Yes. In other words, were they faith-based? Was it faith-based school education that you attended?
No, I attended what we would call public school, you would call state school, I think.
Yes. And you're an active Catholic, is that right?
I am.
Yes. And insofar as your tertiary education is concerned, you have a Bachelor of Science in Social Work from the Texas Christian University, Fort Worth, Texas in 1990, is that right?
That's right.
And that university, Texas Christian University, is that particular to any particular denomination within the Christian religion more broadly?
It is. It's affiliated with the Disciples of Christ.
Disciples of Christ.
Yes.
And then you have a Master's of Science in Social Work from the University of Texas at Arlington, 1992, is that right?
That's right.
And a PhD in Social Work, also University of Texas at Arlington, 1995, is that right?
That's correct.
And in your CV that's described as clinical track. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. When you work on your PhD in that particular program, you have two options. And one is a clinical track, which would focus more on therapeutic types of work. And the other is an administrative track that would focus on being responsible for nonprofit organizations that would provide social service to groups of people.
And is that a PhD by dissertation alone or part dissertation and part coursework?
There's coursework, and then you do a dissertation at the end.
Right. And proportionately, how, insofar as qualifying for the PhD, how much is allocated to the dissertation as opposed to the coursework?
It depends on the person, how long it takes them to get their PhD, to get their dissertation completed, but roughly speaking, I would say 2/3 coursework, 1/3 dissertation.
And the dissertation, how long is it?
How long is it?
Yes, in words.
Oh, I have no idea.
Your PhD, they didn't specify it has to be...
A certain number of words?
Yes. No.
Not that I recall.
All right, thank you. And your PhD dissertation is entitled A Logical Regression Model on the Decision-Making Process of Women in Abusive Relationships. Is that right?
That's correct.
Right. And that's, I would understand from the title, not to do with or relevant to child sexual abuse particularly.
Not particularly. It was women who were in abusive relationships making decisions whether to stay or to leave an abusive partner.
And did you publish your dissertation?
I did not.
And have you published any peer-reviewed publications?
I have not.
In your CV, you mention a couple of publications that you do have, and that's on page 7 of the CV. That's at Ringtail 23.
Yes.
You've only listed 2 there. I understand there are others. Is that right?
Things that I've written have been published in online educational programs. I have a couple of chapters now that have been published, but none of those are peer-reviewed articles, if that's the question.
And the first one you have there, Putting Abuse in Context, America magazine, September 2006. America magazine is a magazine published by the Order of Jesuits, is that right?
Yes, it's a Jesuit publication.
Yes. And the second publication you have there, Human Development magazine, is a Catholic magazine, is that right? Or journal?
Yes, it's a Catholic magazine.
Yeah, and you're on the board of that, the editorial board of that journal?
Yes.
Now, insofar as your work history and experience is concerned, I understand from your CV that you were first employed in 1992 in a consulting firm, is that right?
That's correct.
And you worked with that firm until 2007?
That's correct.
And thereafter you've worked as an independent consultant in essentially your own consultancy, is that right?
That's correct.
And if I have it correctly, you've not worked in a service delivery organization per se, have you?
I have worked in service delivery organizations while I was still working on my PhD or working on my master's degree or working on my bachelor's degree. Throughout the time I was in school, I had to work.
And let's leave school aside. In the time period of your postgraduate education, what were the nature of the service delivery organizations you worked in?
They were residential treatment programs for children, day treatment programs for children, mostly for children who had experienced emotional, physical, sexual abuse and had emotional and behavioral problems as a result.
And the nature of your work in those institutions?
I did social work, I did social intake work, I facilitated groups.
And was some of that part of your training as a social worker?
Yes.
In other words, linked to your academic work?
Some was part, I worked in practicums while I was in school, and I also worked to pay for school.
All right, thank you. Now, one of the things that's important in this area of, broadly speaking, child safety or the prevention of child sexual abuse in organizations is the question of standards. Have you ever developed such standards? In other words, standards of practice for the reporting or prevention of child sexual abuse in religious organizations specifically?
Could I just clarify the language, standards of practice? I've worked to figure out and determine what were the standards of care in a particular time frame. And when I say standard of care, I mean what would be a reasonable expectation of an organization in a particular time frame, given the information that was available through professional research, the guidelines that were available, the criminal justice system. So that would be a standard of care. And then there's also best practice, which is recommendations that I would make, that I would advocate that a better way of doing things would be this type of a practice. And so I don't usually use the word standard of practice. I would say standard of care and best practice.
All right, so insofar as standard of care is concerned, what you've indicated, if I understand you correctly, is you've looked back historically and identified what seemed to you to be the standards that were applicable at a particular time. Is that right?
Yes.
And insofar as best practice is concerned, that would be looking at any current point in time as to what you would regard to be best organizational practice. Is that right?
Yes.
Insofar as developing best practice is concerned, can you identify in your CV, where you've outlined a lot of the work that you've done in different organizations, which of those has involved that? In other words, which of that work has involved developing best practice or advising on best practice?
Sure. So even beginning back at the beginning of the work in 1992, the purpose, so from 1992 until today, the purpose of the educational programs that I provide and the consulting that I provide is to work with an individual organization to help them figure out how to better prevent and respond properly to incidents of abuse. So that would be from the very beginning. Now, what we knew and understood when I started is different than what we know now, but that's always been the purpose, has been to push the organization along to try to figure out how do you prevent, how do you respond if someone comes and says that they've had an experience of abuse. That's always been the purpose.
So if I'm to understand you correctly, essentially throughout your consulting career, at any particular point in time, you've consulted to organizations where at that point in time you've engaged with them as to what best practice is or should be for their organization. Is that right?
It is. And if I could just clarify where that information first came from. Before I started consulting, I worked conducting root cause analysis of cases and analyzing cases in organizations to figure out at what point could this have been prevented? At what point could this have been responded to more quickly? Were there warning signs? And if there were, and typically you can find something that could be fixed, then to figure out how that could be implemented as a prevention process in an organization. So once you put together 200 or 300 or 400 cases, you begin to see the patterns. I'm sure that you would see the patterns now. When you follow along those patterns, and you can figure out where is the piece that can be fixed in, for example, screening and selection, or in supervision, or in opportunities for people to come forward. So that's always been the purpose. And I started consulting after conducting research.
And that research, in what way were those cases, the hundreds you've spoken of cases, presented to you, and how did you get access to them?
Originally, there weren't hundreds and hundreds. The way that we started was working with organizations that already, we had a group of consultants and already had contacts with organizations, and asked them to help us identify cases that we could analyze. There were also some publicized cases that had been publicized through the legal system, and so you could use those cases. And as we began consulting and as I began doing the work, we could add the cases that in the early days, when somebody would call and say, we want to figure out a prevention plan in 1993 or 1994, almost invariably there had been some cases in their organization. And so we would accumulate those cases that way.
And I take it you learned a lot from the analysis of those cases.
I did learn a lot from the analysis of those cases.
And you didn't publish the outcomes of that analysis, as I understand it.
We do not.
Is there a reason for that? I would have thought that others might have found your work in that area valuable had it been published.
That's true. The trouble was that the way that the cases were identified and the way that they could be analyzed was not up to the rigors of empirical research in that way. When you begin to make generalizations and publish an article that says this is everything that we've found, you can have anecdotal evidence and say this is what we found in this case, this is what we found in that case, but oftentimes the amount of information you have about a particular case will vary from organization to organization. When you came along, were you able to do interviews? And there was so much in the research methodology that didn't bring it up to the standards to be published in that way.
In the period post-2007, in other words, when you had your own consultancy, with reference to the particular work identified in your CV, can you identify for us which of those items of work or engagements involved the review or presentation of best practice in the organization?
From 2007 to the present?
Yes. So in other words, I'm looking at page 2 of your CV.
Yes.
That's Ringtail 18.
And your specific question is what involved the review and development?
Yeah, the review of or development of best practice in the organization.
The review, the risk assessment at Milton Hershey School. It's a little bit difficult for me to talk about that because so much of what I have to do isn't on behalf of a specific organization. So in order to continuously know what is best practice, you have to continuously read the empirical research. You have to continuously apply findings from various organizations. So in some ways it's all tied in, but I think that what you're asking me is when was I reviewing their practices to give them feedback?
Well, to use your terminology, let me rephrase it. Reviewing their particular standards of care and advising on their best practice, in other words, what their best or better practice should be.
Okay. So the way that I would do that normally, for example, the risk assessment at Milton Hershey School, and that's a school that provides education for impoverished children.
Yes.
So what I would do, and what I did, is look at everything that they're doing in terms of their practices. How do they screen? How do they supervise? And then compare those with what would be the standard of care or what would be expected in an industry that's similar to theirs. And then if there's anything from a risk management perspective that could be helpful to bring them to an even better practice, then I would make that recommendation.
All right, just before you go on and identify the next one and so on, because I'm going to ask you just to identify each one, but you mentioned there the standards of care in the industry. What do you have reference to identify what is the standard of care?
So it depends on the industry, because in a place where there's accreditation standards, those would clearly be the standards of care. Many of the organizations I work with don't have accreditation or don't have a particular set of standards that have been imposed, but they have to figure those out. So the other places that I would look would be the guidelines that have been given through a governmental entity, the publications that are available for those types of organizations, what similar organizations are doing, if it's been found, for example, the Department of Education has published a study perhaps on peer-to-peer, student-to-student abuse, and they have recommendations. So any of those would be reference points for the particular type of organization.
Can I just understand something? Your CV includes a list of the organisations which you refer to as specific client organisations.
Yes.
Now, just taking the religious organisations, I haven't counted them up. There's a lot of them.
There's a lot. I've worked a great deal with religious organizations.
Are you telling us that you've gone in and done separate work with each of these separate religious organisations?
Yes.
True. How many are there?
Well, one of the reasons that there's so many is that in the United States, when the Catholic Church developed programs for dioceses under the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, the Conference of Major Superiors of Men also developed a program, and I oversaw the implementation of that program, and during that time worked with many individual religious orders and congregations of men.
So when you say you oversaw the program, a program was developed and then you participated in its implementation. Is that what you're saying?
I worked with them to develop the program of accreditation.
So
and
who
then
did you work with for that?
The Conference of Major Superiors of Men.
So that's an overarching body.
It is, and we had a specific advisory body of individual leaders from within that to develop standards. And then I went to regional meetings with the leadership of those orders and congregations.
So you've been to meetings
standards.
with each of these organisations?
The ones that I have listed are the ones that I've actually been to, either went to where they live to do an accreditation audit, or I went and did an educational program with them, or I did a risk assessment with them, or developed policies with them. So each one of those would be an individual meeting at most of the time the place where they function.
Individual meeting or series of meetings? Or what?
Sometimes for weeks, sometimes
You must
for
have been very
months.
busy. You must have been very busy.
You can see why I decided I was traveling too much and had to make some changes.
Well, what about all of the other organisations? Are you saying to us that you've been one-on-one with each of the other organisations as well?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes, sir, I am.
To do what?
It depends. Sometimes a risk assessment, sometimes an educational program, sometimes policy development.
Do you have assistants?
Much of this work took place before 2007. I still do a great deal of work now. I had a team when I was working with Presidium.
You had a team of people working with you?
Yes.
So when was that? That was up until?
Up until 2007.
So can we assume that all of the work that's been done up until 2007 has been done by you with others, is that right?
Up until 2007?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that, when I look at these organisations, seems to be all of it, is that right?
Up to 2007? No.
Which ones are after 2007?
Are we looking at religious, or are we looking at just throughout?
Well, I'm looking at organisations under the heading specific client organisations, but then trying to relate that back. But have I missed something?
Perhaps to help you, Dr. Applewhite, would it be those that are listed from the middle of page 2 through to the foot of page 3, that page and a half?
Sure.
In the post-2007 period.
Yes.
I was just trying to relate any of. So you've identified particular organisations, September 2007, and then research. You've also identified, and then we go, I think, to everything that's been done before 2007, and then I was trying to relate that back to the particular organisations you mentioned. My guess was that they were all before 2007.
So I can, the work that I've done since 2007 has focused on independent schools, private schools. So they would be, if you look under schools, Buckingham, Brown, and Nichols School.
So that's on
Hackley
page 11.
School.
You're looking at page 11.
Yes.
Yes.
Hackley, yes. And then I've also focused on a couple of international projects that in the Catholic Church, the Missionaries of the Sacred Heart, Holy Cross Fathers and Brothers, and the Montfort Missionaries.
What have you done for them?
I've worked with those to develop standards that could be applied to their organization, so that would be congregations of men that would have men in anywhere from 20 to 40 countries. And so I've worked with them to develop standards that could be applied to their organization throughout the world.
What do you mean standards?
Standards, so for example, that just a standard that I would use as an example would be that anyone who's ever had a sexual offense against a minor would never be in public ministry again. And that would be a standard that I would work with them to educate people about, to try to make sure that each part of the world where they're working would uphold that standard. So we would develop the standards and then do education about it and work with them to figure out what the policy differences might be, because the law is so different in so many different places, and then go to those countries if we need to and make sure that they're being implemented.
Dr. Applewhite, if you go back to page 2 of your CV, you had identified the Milton Hershey School, that's the second, as it were, sub-bullet point,
Yes.
as being work that you did, which included the identification of their standard of care and advising on best practice. Do you recall when was that, Milton Hershey School?
I've worked with Milton Hershey School off and on since 2007. So when I did that actual risk assessment, I did a risk assessment and then I did a review later to see if they'd implemented the recommendations. So probably I did the review maybe a year ago, and the original risk assessment maybe 2 years ago.
All right, and then
It could have been a little longer, but about that.
And then which of these others here involve the identification of their standards and advice on best practice?
I don't see any more that specifically had that as the function of the work. Conducting a risk assessment is one of those types of tasks that takes quite a bit of time, and so that's something that if I'm asked to do that, I often refer back to my former company and say, maybe you need a team to do that.
Now, if we take a look at page 10 of your CV, you do list a number of institutions in Australia. So sort of 3/4 of the way down, we see Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Melbourne, Victoria, and then there's some others. But starting first with Melbourne, can you explain what work you did for that Archdiocese and when it was?
Melbourne in particular, I have not worked closely with. They asked me to do a video, an educational video, where they had someone come in and ask certain questions. They came to Austin, where I live, and I answered those questions. And I don't know if they've actually ever used that or not. So that would be one that I have not worked very closely with.
And when was that?
That was maybe a year and a half ago.
And a couple further down it says Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney.
Yes. I've done work with the Catholic Education Office in Sydney.
Yes, well, you list that separately on the bottom of the next page, so perhaps we can deal with the Catholic Education Office separately, but insofar specifically as the Archdiocese of Sydney is concerned, what work did you do with them and when?
I think that I must have listed that incorrectly, because the work, I've done several different educational programs for the Catholic Education Office, but not the Archdiocese separately from them.
Can you tell us what work you did for the Catholic Education Office?
Sure. I have conducted educational programs on general prevention, awareness of the dynamics of relationship-based abuse, types of people who offend, who sexually abuse in faith-based organizations, and warning signs that we would see in faith-based organizations and how to act on those warning signs in terms of prevention. I've also done a program on pastoral response to people who come forward.
And by done a program, do you mean you came here and ran a program with people from that institution?
I've actually conducted programs for them in two separate ways, and that would actually be other Catholic dioceses from throughout New South Wales were invited to come to or plug into video conference training that I conducted, and then I also came here and conducted programs.
All right, and the programs you came here and conducted?
Yes.
When were those?
I think that the last one I did was 3 years ago.
Is this with teachers or priests or?
I haven't done a program for priests in the Archdiocese of Sydney. Some priests may have come, but it would have been for principals and leadership within Catholic education.
So lay people?
They would be lay people, unless there's a principal that happens to be a religious.
And the Catholic Diocese of Adelaide?
Yes.
What work did you do for them?
Similar types of programs where I usually try to start with the basics of the dynamics of how abuse happens, the experiences that people who are abused describe, and then go into what leadership can do when they learn of warning signs, how they can make it easier for people to come forward.
And was that by video conferencing, or did you come and do programs in Adelaide?
I did programs in Adelaide.
And when was that?
Maybe the first one was in 2010, 2011. And the other, yeah.
And then you've got the Catholic Diocese of Cairns.
Yes.
What did you do with them? Obviously, if it's the same as you did with Adelaide, you can say it's the same and it'll cut it short.
It's the same as I did with Adelaide, but I believe that I conducted more in-depth seminars in Adelaide and have only done basic programs so far in Cairns.
And over the page, about 8 or 10 dot points down, we have the Roman Catholic Diocese of Toowoomba in
Yes.
Queensland.
That's actually another one where I should be specific. That's with the Catholic Education Office in Toowoomba.
And what did you do with them?
I did a seminar, a full-day seminar that they videotaped, where we went from the basics all the way through to what leadership can do to prevent in the future, as well as what ordinary people who are receiving services in the organization, which in this case would be the parents and students need to know. And they use those videotapes to also conduct educational programs for new staff that are coming in now.
And I missed one on the previous page, Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Brisbane. You've done a couple of educational programs for that archdiocese, have you not?
I have. I went there on this trip, and I also had been there previously 2 years ago.
So if I understand it correctly, the work you've done in Australia has for the most part been educational programs of one form or another, is that right?
That's correct.
And has that really become more the focus of your work since you've been in your own consultancy, educational programs, that is?
I do more educational programs now because of the time that it takes to do risk assessments and the amount of time that being away from home that it takes to do risk assessments, especially if you're just one person. So I do more educational programs, but I also do individual consultancy so that if somebody's dealing with a particular situation, for example, somebody has boundary violations and it's not a criminal behavior, but they're worried about them, that they could get advice and I could review it and walk them through the steps.
And to use your terminology, the standards of care that apply at any particular time are changing, aren't they? I mean, in other words, this is quite a fast-moving area insofar as standards are concerned, is that right?
Yes, I've seen tremendous change since I began the work.
So if one was to talk about current standards, one would be talking what sort of time frame? The last 2, 3 years, 5 years? What would current standards be?
I really put the current standards in a time frame from about 2000 to today. Even though things are changing rapidly, I would call the current era a different time frame from 2000 to today. I think after 2 or 3 more years go by, we're going to be able to separate out 2010 from the others because things are beginning to formulate and become more clear. I'm seeing more consistency, but I'm sure we have a long way to go.
Now, returning to your report itself and paragraph 4 in particular.
Can I just pause for a moment? You speak about current standards or standards. What are you talking about?
When I'm speaking about current standards or standards, I'm really saying given everything that we know today, what are the reasonable expectations for an organization today? And in a sense, if they're not holding up to those standards that we could expect from everybody, given everything that we know now, what would be falling short of expectations, reasonable expectations by society?
But in relation to what?
In relation to how they prevent abuse, particularly in sexual abuse, how they prevent sexual abuse, how they respond to warning signs, how they respond if somebody actually discloses abuse, how do they fix things afterwards, how do they follow up. So, I mean, the prevention piece of it in itself is where I'm focusing attention now in my educational programs because I feel like we're past the point of just responding properly, that we really should be using what we know to prevent it from happening in the first place. So that's what I mean.
Well, just to develop that a little bit further, insofar then as current standards or current expectations of standards are concerned, let's deal perhaps slightly more narrowly with the question of raising and responding to child sexual abuse allegations or complaints or concerns within an organization. Would one of those standards or requirements be what I might describe as child-centered?
Did it be child-centered?
Yes.
Or I would probably make it a bit more broadly that individual, because a lot of people who come forward, at least in a faith-based organization, come forward later. And so I would hope that even if they weren't a child anymore, that we could have a victim or survivor-centered response.
Yes, I take that point. Thank you. And in other words, would that be that the best interests of the child or adult survivor is foremost in the way in which we respond?
Yes.
Does that mean that the process should be one which is designed to ensure that the child or adult survivor feels able to come forward and comfortable in reporting what's happened?
Absolutely.
Is that a critical thing to an effective response from an institution?
Not in my opinion.
Sorry?
You're saying, is it critical? Oh, you're saying, is it important?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Is it one of the primary, as it were, factors that must be found in any system of response?
For a faith-based organization, I think how the person feels about being able to come forward and how they're treated once they're coming forward is absolutely essential.
Why just faith-based? Why isn't that true of any organisation?
The difficulty is, because I work with so many organizations that don't have the resources to have that set up for themselves, social service organizations that are going to need to use an outside entity to be able to come forward. They might not be fully equipped to have a program for someone to come into or to be prepared for that to come forward to them.
Well, even then, shouldn't they have in place a process, even if it involves engaging an outside organisation?
Absolutely.
Shouldn't they have in place a process which allows a child or an adult survivor the capacity to come and feel safe in reporting?
Yes, definitely.
And that's partly about being child-centered, about making the child or the survivor feel safe and secure. But it's also to do, I suppose, with achieving an environment where full disclosure is possible or more likely.
You're asking if part of the way you create a victim or survivor-centered response system is to create an environment where people feel comfortable to disclose. Is that right?
I'm saying there are two reasons why one may, or perhaps there are many others, there are at least two reasons why it's important to create that environment. One would be for the health and well-being of the survivor. But another and related one is that in that environment, they're more likely to be able to disclose what actually happened so that the organisation can properly deal with it. Would that be right?
Yes. We could probably come up with other reasons as well.
And would another aspect of best practice be an ability by the organisation to take effective child-safe action once a report has been made and upheld?
It really depends on the organization. For example, a school may not be able to take child-safe action themselves. They have to rely on child welfare entities to assist them with that.
So would it be right then either an ability themselves to take child-safe action or a relationship with other authorities that have that ability?
Yes. And the question of how is the child going to be safe is a question that must be answered.
And that would depend on the facts justifying it. In other words, if there were, on the information available, the reasonable conclusion was that abuse had taken place, then the organisation should have the ability to act on it. Is that right?
I don't think that's what I'm saying, merely because many times when it's time for an organization to make a report to the child welfare authorities, the facts of the matter haven't yet been established.
All right. Yeah, that's an important qualification insofar as reporting is concerned. I see that insofar as the organisation taking its own action, child safe action internally is concerned, that ability would be required once sufficient facts are available to determine that there has been abuse. Would that be right?
I'm just sort of getting hung up on whose responsibility it is to take child safe action, because that really varies from the situation, who the perpetrator is, who the child is. And so, for example, if we're talking about a resident camp and a child reports abuse out at an overnight camp, and the allegation is that the person who's working at the camp has abused, then being able to separate that child from the person who abused them is absolutely has to be part of the response. You don't want to give the person further access to that child. And that's an action that the organization can take. But sometimes, for example, in a school, they make a report, but the child is still going home that day, and the report was about a person who abused them at home. Mm. And so it's not, unless the police say don't send that child home, or the child welfare entity says don't send that child home, then the school can't just say, oh, well, we're taking this child home with us, we're not going to let him go back to that house. I mean, that just can't be done.
But the starting point is either the school or the camp or any other institution has to have within its own operation a process which makes it possible for the child or adult survivor to come and tell what happened, isn't it? That's the starting point.
Yes, I think that's
And great care has to be taken by the institution to ensure that what it has in place, so far as it can, will ensure that the child or adult survivor will come and tell their story.
I think when we were talking about, what do we consider part of this current era, I think that that's one of the most critical pieces of the current era.
And if an institution doesn't have that, it's seriously failing in its obligation to those within its care, isn't it?
If there's not a way for someone to come forward?
If there's not a safe way where people, children or adults, feel that they can come forward and report the abuse, then the institution's failing.
They wouldn't be meeting the current standards of care.
No.
And I take from what you say, too, that there should be strong and cooperative relationships with child protection authorities. In other words, between the organisation and child protection authorities, and indeed criminal justice authorities. Would that be right?
Certainly in a country like this, it's not in every country is it easy to have strong relationships with the criminal justice system, but in a country like this, certainly.
And in the case of the identification of an offender, to have a proper risk assessment to inform what's then to be done, that would be another important component, wouldn't it?
Well, are you talking about on the part of the organisation?
Yes. Yeah, and an offender within the organisation. So an example you gave of someone teaching at camp, or let's say a teacher or a minister in a church.
There are scenarios where having a risk assessment is critical, but from my perspective, we don't. If a teacher or a minister or someone has behaved improperly, crossed the line with repeated boundary violations or there's been a disclosure of abuse, then that individual continuing to be in a position of trust with children is not acceptable.
So that must be
whether
removed.
There's a risk assessment or not. I wouldn't want to have to wait for a risk assessment if we know what the behavior is.
Now, I understand from your CV that you have given evidence as an expert witness for the Jehovah's Witnesses on previous occasions. Is that right?
Yes.
3 in the US and 1 in the UK.
That's correct.
And in each of those cases was the Jehovah's Witness organization in one form or another a defendant.
Yes.
And those were civil claims for damages arising from abuse, is that right?
That's correct.
Each of them.
I believe so, yes.
And I take it you were paid for your services
Yes,
as you are today
that's correct.
at your usual consultancy rates.
Yes.
And following any of those cases, have you advised or made recommendations to the Jehovah's Witness organization in whatever formation as to ways in which it can or should change or adapt to better meet best practice?
What I've done is ask the questions along the way as to particular things that I saw in the case and asked whether or not those had changed, if the scenario had changed, had they already changed their practices in particular areas. And I can't think of a time when I asked anything that they hadn't already resolved. So each of those cases was going back in time. And so they've had quite a few changes to their practices over the past 10 years.
Have you ever given evidence that's critical of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
In terms of a lawsuit? Or
In any forum where you've given evidence, have you given evidence critical of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
I haven't I haven't been hired to do that. I'm sure that when I was testifying or something I wrote, I may have said something that was critical or negative.
When you say you haven't been hired to do that, what have you been hired to do?
Well, what I was originally hired to do by the Jehovah's Witnesses was just review their literature. And they asked me to give my opinion of what it was that they were giving as advice. And then subsequently they asked me to review a case and also to provide the testimony regarding my opinions about their literature.
And was any of the evidence you've ever given critical of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Not specifically that I know.
Have you given evidence in any court case on behalf of any other organisation?
I have.
Which other organisations have you given evidence on behalf of?
The state of Washington child welfare system.
Anyone else?
That's all that I know now.
Were you critical of the state of Washington?
Oh, no. I was saying that they had met the standards of care.
When did you give that evidence?
About 7 months ago.
7 months. Has the case been decided by the judge?
Yes.
What happened?
They found for the defense.
Do you know the name of the case?
That is the Hamrick
Sorry?
versus State of Washington.
How do I spell that?
Hamrick.
Which court was it in? Do you know?
Washington State.
Oh. Okay.
You've also provided testimony, at least by affidavit, in a case for the Boy Scouts of America, isn't that right?
Yes.
In September 2013.
In a court case? In a court testimony case?
United States District Court of Washington by affidavit.
Oh, okay.
At least. I don't know whether there was oral testimony after that.
Yes.
Yes. For the Boy Scouts.
That's right.
Are there others where you've provided written evidence, although you may not have given oral evidence?
Yes.
For what other organizations?
So, for other organizations or other cases?
Well, other organizations, and then in respect of each of the cases.
Okay. Because generally what happens if somebody wants me to provide expert consulting or expert testimony, then I ask them to send me the case, and I review the case, and then I tell them morally what I think, and then they either ask me to write a report or offer testimony, or they don't. And so that's generally how I determine, or how they determine whether or not they want me to move forward and testify.
Well, in respect of those that you have given a report
Yes.
to be used in a case, for which organizations?
There was I would have to go back to make sure that I'm not missing anything.
Well, as best you can
There's
remember, Dr. Applewhite.
Yes, I've offered testimony by way of deposition in a case that was, well, it was against the United States government, the Defense Department. But in that case, I was testimony for the plaintiff. And there was also one that was, I just would have to look. I'm sorry, I would have to go back to my notes.
Other than that one you mentioned against the U.S. Government Department of Defense, are there others in which you've acted for the plaintiff?
Yes. I can recall one in which it was against a school district in which a volunteer had come in, and he volunteered, and then he stayed and started taking students to the bathroom, and he sexually abused them in the bathroom. And in that case, I testified that they had not met the standard of care.
And there's reference in some of the correspondence I see to the Baker case. Is that one of the cases that you worked in for the Jehovah's Witnesses?
That was for the Jehovah's Witnesses, yes.
So what was that case?
I was asked really to provide testimony regarding the structure and governance of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And that was a case in which a girl was sexually abused by a man who had once been a ministerial servant.
Is that one of the cases that you refer to as the 3 in the United States and 1 in the United Kingdom? Is that one of those?
That's the one in the United Kingdom.
Now, in this particular case, when were you first asked, in other words, this hearing, when were you first asked by the Jehovah's Witnesses whether you would provide an opinion?
I don't remember the exact date. I'm sure there's a letter, but I know that it was just before I left for Australia, so it would have been...
Well, I've seen correspondence going back to 25 May. As long ago as that?
Okay. It could be that there was something. I don't recall it being something that I thought about having to look at until I was preparing to leave for Australia. So it would have been either May or June of this year.
Now, one of the things you mentioned in your report is the federal court code of practice for expert witnesses. That's in paragraph 8. You say you've been provided with it, and you say you've considered all the matters contained in these guidelines when formulating the opinions set out in your statement, and you acknowledge that your opinions are based on your expertise as set out above. I mean, are we to understand from that that you consider you've complied with the requirements of that guideline?
Yes.
I'd like to show that guideline to you. Do you have a copy of it? We can provide one to you.
Thank you.
In particular, with regard to paragraph 2.1, under the heading, the form of the expert's report. Do you see that?
2, yes.
It says an expert's written report must comply with Rule 23.13. I won't trouble you with that, and must therefore, and therefore must. And then there are various requirements there. A, be signed by the expert. B, contain an acknowledgement, and so on. The key ones are possibly starting at E. Set out separately each of the factual findings or assumptions on which the expert's opinion is based. So do you consider in your report you've set out each of the factual findings or assumptions on which your opinion is based?
I believe so.
And F, set out separately from the factual findings or assumptions each of the expert's opinions. Do you believe your report sets out your opinion separately from the factual findings and assumptions?
Some are set out separately, and then I can think of a couple of opinions that are in the same section with what I consider to be the factual bases.
All right, we'll come back to those when we look at your report in more detail. And G sets out the reasons for each of your opinions. So to understand to find your reasons, we will find them in the report. Is that right?
Yes.
The reasons for your opinions.
Yes.
And at 2.3, it says there should be included in or attached to the report the documents and other materials that the expert has been instructed to consider. Now, obviously, in this case, there's quite a volume of material, and it's not attached to your report, and we thank you for that. However, what your report might have done, and this is not a criticism, I'm just trying to work out what we're now going to do about this, is identify those materials. So are you able to identify for us what materials you've had regard to in formulating the opinions that you state in your report? There are obviously those that are specifically mentioned or referenced, but are there others?
The ones that I specifically relied upon, I tried to note, and I do apologize because I was already fully scheduled when I started working on this, and so I may not have been as conscientious about being sure that those attachments were there. But the ones that are, there wouldn't be another source that I know of now that I really relied upon that I didn't include.
And perhaps you can help us in any event as to what the total corpus or total body of the materials was that you had available to you and which you consulted.
The Jehovah's Witnesses have published much of their material online, and so those are available readily online, and so I consulted some of those materials. I couldn't put my finger on a particular document that I relied upon that I haven't identified. If I saw something that so because the Jehovah's Witnesses publish so much information about what they believe, that it's not uncommon if you're talking about a particular part of what they do or an aspect of their life, that they might have 40 references to that. And
we found that.
So I just trying to narrow that down to a particular one that clearly states, that's what I tried to do in the report. That doesn't mean that there aren't other references to it in other places.
Doctor, I think one of the difficulties with the report in the way that it's been written is, for example, in paragraphs 45 and 46, where you proffer an opinion, but we actually don't know what you've looked at to compare the Jehovah's Witnesses with. You see?
Right.
And we understand what you say about looking at Jehovah's Witness material, but before you can proffer an opinion, we need to know what the comparison is, don't we?
So the way that I structured it, I was trying to, in that whole section, identify the materials that I'm speaking about and then have kind of a concluding.
That's the Jehovah's Witnesses material.
Right. Oh, you're saying from other organizations.
Well, you see, you're offering an opinion to us, asking us to accept the opinion that they're better than anyone else, but we don't know what you've looked at, do we, to make that comparison?
Right, I understand.
What can we do with that?
It depends on how much time I have to prepare a response, but I can say, and maybe I should have said here, during the 1980s and 1990s, most religious organizations, faith-based organizations, weren't preparing materials to give to parents and families about sexual abuse. And so
Do you know that for Australia? See, we've got to look at Australia, and before we could accept these opinions, I think we'd need some foundation for them.
Sure. And again, these are anecdotal things. I have asked organizations that I've worked with throughout Australia about what's already in place, because I don't like to ignore things that have already happened. So I've asked for those materials, and I've seen, for example, there's quite a bit of material available now through governmental entities about normal sexual development in children, and so that's a piece that I would use and say, well, you can go to this source. So throughout the time I've worked in Australia, I've always asked for what kinds of materials are the organizations providing, and that's where I arrived at that.
Yes, but you understand how difficult, don't you?
Of course.
At the moment, I'm afraid we just couldn't.
You can't accept that.
We couldn't for ourselves accept that as necessarily the correct outcome, because we don't know what you've looked at.
Sure.
Which is one of the things that the federal court guidelines were trying to deal with, you understand, when an expert gives evidence.
Sure.
Yeah. Yes.
Just returning to the materials on the Jehovah's Witness side of the comparison, I understand that publicly available, in other words, on the internet, the materials are from the period 2000 onwards and not prior to that. Is that your experience?
2000 and onward, with the materials being available online?
Yes.
I wouldn't be able to put a year to that when it became available online, the publications available online, but approximately.
You say one of your sources of access to Jehovah's Witness material is what's published online, and so then, insofar as materials prior to 2000 are concerned, it would then be materials provided to you by those instructing you, I presume.
I thought that you were asking me what I had available to me when I was writing the report.
Yes.
And those materials were available now. I was writing the report last month.
Yes, but last month and this month, so I understand, and I'm asking that this is your experience. What's publicly available on the internet is Jehovah's Witness publications from 2000 onwards. In other words, if you go on the internet today, jw.org, you're not going to find a resource of pre-2000 publications.
Sometimes you can, yes, from far back.
So some you can.
Some you can.
So some of these articles that you referred to that are back in the 70s and 80s, for example, did you access those online, or were you provided them separately?
No, I asked for them.
How did you know to ask for them?
Because I had prepared other reports that had to go back in time as well.
You'd seen them previously?
I'd seen those articles previously. So I reviewed a large body of publications in my initial review, and I picked out the pieces that I thought were critical, and those were the ones that I already had references to.
And you also referred to some publications, some documents, letters, for example, from the branch office to elders, which are not available publicly. I take it those were provided to you.
Yes.
And was there other material available to you or provided to you, such as witness statements in this case study, for example?
No.
Were you not furnished with Mr. O'Brien and Mr. Toole's witness statements?
Oh, yes. There was Mr. O'Brien. I'm sorry, when you said case study, I had forgotten that you're calling each one of these case studies, so case study 29.
Yes.
there were 3 witness statements that I was provided, and I don't recall all the names, but they were the director of the branch and the service director and the legal department director.
Yes. And were you furnished with the statements of either of the survivors who've been the subject of this case study?
No.
And did you consider any independent studies or research about the Jehovah's Witnesses?
No.
Sure, what time Your Honour would like to?
We'll go through to 11:30.
Now, there are really 2 issues that you address in your report, and you identify them as issue 3 and issue 4, taken from the terms of reference. And issue 3, you identify on page 4 of your report. You see that issue 3, case study 29, information regarding the systems, policies and procedures in place within the Jehovah's Witness Church for raising and responding to allegations of or concerns about child sexual abuse. So that's the first issue you were asked to form and provide an opinion on, am I right?
That's right.
And then the second issue is regarded as, labelled as issue 4, which commences towards the foot of page 7 of the report.
That's right.
Yes. Now, dealing with the first issue, as I read and understand the report, firstly, you set out in paragraphs 9 to 21 some background material, which presumably forms some basis or substratum to your opinion. Is that right?
That's right.
And then in paragraphs 22 to 35, you identify the facts on which you rely to then express the opinion in 36. Is that right?
Yes, and as I'm reading this, I see that on paragraph 23, I cited the wrong resource.
That brief review of contemporary sexual offence.
Yeah, it's actually the history that's been published. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yes, those would be the ones that I used to formulate the opinion on 36.
And the opinion you express, well, firstly, perhaps to get it out of the way, in the second sentence of paragraph 36, you say, because I have not reviewed any specific cases, I'm not able to offer opinions regarding whether the implementation of these guidelines has ultimately resulted in law-abiding responses, good practice of child protection or compassionate care of those who've experienced them. So, as I understand it, you're putting to one side the question of implementation. What you've done is essentially a documentary review. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the first sentence of 36 then expresses your opinion with regard to that documentary review. Is that right?
That's right.
On issue number 3.
That's right.
And what you do is you really do a comparison. On the one side of the comparison, you've got the Jehovah's Witnesses, and on the other side of the comparison, you've got religious organizations throughout the world. Is that right? This is in first sentence of 36.
Yes.
So you say the current messages to those who have experienced abuse and the guidelines that have been provided to elders and congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses are consistent with and in some respects better than the current practices of religious organizations throughout the world.
That's right.
Right. And dealing with the second side of the comparison first, the current practices of religious organizations throughout the world, it's really the same point that was raised by His Honour in relation to another paragraph. You'll see the difficulty there. We don't know what those current practices are. You haven't identified them.
Right.
Or what religious organizations they are.
That's right.
It's quite a big claim, religious organizations throughout the world. I take it you would like to limit that in some way. I
Sure.
You don't claim to have knowledge of current practice of religious organizations throughout the world, do you?
No.
And
Can I just understand, what do you mean by current messages?
What I mean by current messages is what they're say in their publications to people who have experienced abuse about the healing process and the need to talk with other people. Even to the messages, for example, if somebody has experienced abuse and they see in a publication that people are being told to be kind to those who've experienced abuse and things of that nature. That's what I mean.
Back at paragraph 25, you talk about elders being instructed to treat victims with kindness and to follow the established internal ecclesiastical procedures for allegations of abuse.
Yes.
Now, when you speak of current messages, are you capturing those matters as well in current messages?
When I speak of current messages, I'm really more speaking less about the procedures that they have in place for their internal governance questions and more about the general publications for individuals.
Procedures send messages too, don't they?
Yes.
In fact, the procedures that are followed may be much more powerful in giving a message than a publication.
It's possible.
And have you looked at the procedures?
The current procedures?
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you look at past procedures as well?
I have.
Okay. We'll come to those.
Okay.
Insofar as the first half of the comparison is concerned, the Jehovah's Witnesses themselves, of course, if any of the factual matters you've identified as underpinning that opinion are ultimately turn out to be mistaken, then that would throw the opinion into question, wouldn't it?
We're speaking about opinion 36.
Yes.
If information were to arise that shows that that's not correct, then the opinion would be incorrect.
Well, let's be clear about it. If information is to arise or be presented which shows that one or other of the factual matters set out preceding paragraph 36 is incorrect, then that would throw the opinion expressed in the first paragraph of 36 into question.
Into question, yes.
Can I take you to paragraph 10 of your report? And you can read that paragraph, but in particular, when you get to the last sentence, which says that elders are viewed as fellow workers by their fellow elders and by other congregational members. Now, congregational members are referred to as publishers, is that right?
In some cases, yes.
Well, I'll use that terminology interchangeably with congregational members. Now, of course, you can't say really how congregational members view the elders, can you?
I would say based on publications.
Well, there's no empirical study, is there, as to how congregation members view their elders, is there?
If there's an empirical study, I'm not aware of it.
And ultimately, that's a subjective question in the sense that it's what's going on in the minds of the congregation members that you're addressing yourself to.
What I'm really addressing is the messages that are in the materials for elders and materials that are in the publications that speak to that particular question.
And those materials are published by the governing body in Brooklyn.
That's right.
That's right. And distributed throughout the world.
That's right.
They're certainly not published by the congregation members.
No, they're not.
Now, you're aware, I take it, that in the Jehovah's Witness faith, elders are regarded as being appointed by the Holy Spirit?
My understanding was that they are appointed, but with the guidance of the Holy Spirit.
Well, let's take a quick look at that. I'd like you to look at tab 109 of our tender bundle, which will go up in front of you on the screen. And we can show you the first page of that. You'll be familiar with this textbook, I take it, Organized to Do Jehovah's Will.
Yes.
You've looked at this for formulating your report.
Yes.
And this applied from 2005 and thereafter.
There was a previous version of it, but it wasn't called the same name.
Yes, there's a previous version, and testimony that you've given in one of the other cases really concerned the previous version. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And this is given to, if we just scroll down a little bit, you'll see it. It says this book is issued to, and there's space to fill it in, and the date, and the place of baptism, and the date. It's given to baptized publishers in the Jehovah's Witness Church, as I understand it, on the occasion of their baptism. Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding.
Yes. And if we have a look at page 30 of that report, which is ringtail 16, I beg your pardon, can you go back to page 28?
It might be easier for me to have a
Indeed, it probably will be. We'll organize one.
it's a little bit hard for me to. Thank you.
So you'll see in 28, halfway down, it says, "We are grateful for the Spirit-appointed overseers in the congregation." Do you see that?
Yes.
And if we look at 29, the top of 29, qualifications for overseers. Now, just to clarify, in this publication, the phraseology overseers is what's now referred to as elders. Is that right?
There are other kinds of overseers, but they're referring to elders.
Yes. And you'll see in the second sentence it says, "Only if they qualify can it be said that they are appointed by the Holy Spirit." And there's a reference, a scriptural reference.
Yes.
And at the top of page 37, which is ringtail 23, it says, "Their course of conduct and the fruits of their labors would give evidence that they are appointed by the Holy Spirit." So you accept that in the view of the Jehovah's Witnesses, elders are appointed by the Holy Spirit? My team can dig out another 40 references for you.
Yes.
And if we go back to page 30, towards the foot of the page, that's ringtail 16. Dr. Applewhite, just for clarification, you can ignore my references to ringtail. That's for the operator putting documents on the screen. You'll see in the lower paragraph on that page, although the scriptural requirements may at first seem to be somewhat overwhelming, there would be no reason for Christian men to shy away from desiring the fine work associated with the office of overseer. And then it says, "By taking the lead and manifesting fine Christian qualities, overseers encourage other members of the congregation to do the same." So it's the case, isn't it, that overseers are required and expected to take the lead in the congregation?
Well, here it's saying that they need to be a good role model. They certainly have a leadership role,
Yes.
but there's no question about that.
And on page 31, we'll see it at the top of the page. Those standing before the congregation as appointed overseers are required to take the lead. And the congregants would see them as the congregational leaders, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Yes. And at 32, you'll see that towards the end of the first paragraph, that about 8 or 10 lines down, it says, others in the congregation would be moved to imitate this fine example and entrust their spiritual life to the shepherd's care. In other words, congregants regard themselves as entrusting their spiritual life to the care of the elders. Is that right?
Yes.
And also on that page, at the foot of the page, exercising oversight of the affairs of the congregation requires a man to demonstrate a measure of orderliness and so on. So elders exercise oversight over the affairs of the congregation, don't they?
They do.
And of course, as you've set out in your report, elders are responsible for investigating reports of wrongdoing. Is that right?
They are.
And in the case of, according to the rules that are set out, them finding that there's sufficient evidence for that, if there's serious wrongdoing, they then establish a judicial committee. That's right, isn't it?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. Your Honour, would this be
Put the question again.
I'll
And then we'll
repeat it
take,
after.
no, put the question again now, and we'll then take the adjournment.
Thank you. It's also that the case, isn't it, that the elders, on finding that an allegation of serious wrongdoing is sufficiently proved or evidenced, they then establish a judicial committee.
That's correct.
And the judicial committee of 3 elders will essentially have a form of a hearing and make a decision in relation to that wrongdoing,
That's correct.
including as to sanctions.
Yes.
Yes.
And just so we make sure we are on common ground, all of the elders are men, aren't they?
They are.
So the process of investigation and determination involves only men.
That's right.
We'll take the morning adjournment.